let's work on with the works of John Piaget, the cognitive perspectives. No? So, in John Piaget's theory of cognitive development, no? So, children actively construct knowledge as they explore and manipulate the world around them. It's more on constructivism, working on your own to learn about the world around you. No? So about exploring, right? Constructing knowledge as we explore. Now, we have the so-called cognitive development. So ano ito? Right? So it's the emergence of the ability to think and understand, no? The acquisition of the ability to think, reason, and solve problems, to the process by which people's thinking changes across the lifespan, and it is the growing apprehension and adaptation to the physical and social environment. So basically, cognitive development is how we construct knowledge as we explore. No? It's about logic, our rationality. So how we develop ourselves, no? How we feed ourselves with knowledge, right? Cognitive development. Now, we have this so-called schema as coined by John Piaget, that it is an internal representation of the world. It helps an individual understand the world they inhabit, and they are cognitive structures that represent a certain aspect of the world and can be seen as categories which have preconceived ideas in them. So what are these preconceived ideas? Like when we talk about the idea of Christmas, no? Hindi lahat ng tao pare-pareho ang conception. No? Excuse me. That when we say Christmas, some people would say it's about gifts. No? Other people would say Santa Claus. Other people would say it's the birth of Jesus. No? So iba-iba ang ating pinanggalingan, and iba-iba din ang ating interpretation of the world around us. No? Yan yung ating preconceived ideas. Now, assimilation, on the other hand, it occurs when we modify or change new information to fit into our schemas. And later on, I'll show you a picture of it. Now, accommodation is when we restructure or modify what we already know so that new information can fit in better. Now, let's take a look at this example. So we have there, the first one is the schema. No? The boy has learned the schema of a cat. Okay? Kung ano ang itsura ng isang cat. No? Yan ang unang tinuro sa kanya, na ang isang cat ay may tail, 4 ang paa. No? Now, when they went to the zoo, no? The boy saw a cub and called it a cat. So the sister said, no, it's a cub. Right? So that's assimilation. Modification of the preconceived idea or the schema. So, na-modify ng sister niya. No? So, sabi niya, no, that's not a cat. It doesn't mean na 4 ang paa at magkamukha sa cat ay cat na yan. Alright? So, na-modify na yung idea niya. Now, he can now accommodate a new idea or a new schema of a cub. So, nadadagdagan ang kanyang knowledge. So, now, meron na siyang schema of a cat and a schema of a cub. So, he accommodates the new information that he was able to encounter. And that goes on and on and on until we have more and more schemas and more knowledge about the world around us. No? Now, let's go to the periods of cognitive development, or the stages. No? So we have sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational. Now, on the first one, basically it starts from birth until the second year of life. No? And it's basically, from the word itself, the use of senses and motor skills. No? every child uses senses and motor skills like items known by use. No? So in this area, a child also develops the so-called object permanence. No? Na natututo na sila when it comes to object permanence. Ano itong object permanence? Ito yung ang isang bata, pag binigyan mo ng laruan tapos itatago mo, alright? Ang alam nila, andun pa rin yung object, permanent na hindi nawawala. Alright? Ito yung time na medyo kung minsan naglalaro ng peekaboo and the like. Alright? And on the pre-operational stage naman, we have this so-called symbolic thinking already na malakas ang kanilang imagination. Wherein, minsan sabi nila, huwag mong apakan yung grass kasi baka umiyak. Or, huwag mong apakan yan kasi nabubuhay yan. Alright? And also, they have egocentric thinking. Meaning to say, egocentric thinking, makasarili sila. Ayaw nilang tumanggap ng idea ng iba. Ang gusto lang nila is yung kanilang idea ang tama. Alright? And when it comes to the concrete operational stage, they can now apply logic. Usually during the 7 to 11 years of life, they can now apply logic, right? Has objective, rational interpretations of it. And they now understand the law of conservation, okay? The numbers, they can count, right? And they can classify things. Ano tong sinasabi nating law of conservation? Ito kasi yung law, when we say law of conservation, when it comes to the pre-operational, hindi pa magaling ang mga bata dito. No? For example, ito yung pag may pera ang bata, no? Kunwari 50 pesos. No? Tapos sasabihin mo, palitan ko ng 10 coins. So that's 10 pesos. Alright? Anong gagawin ng batang nasa pre-operational? Papayag siya. No? Kasi hindi pa nila alam kung ano ang value ng pera. Pero when it comes to 7 to 11 years already, no? Sabi nila, hindi, mas mataas ang value ng 50 pesos. So I will not exchange it with your 10 peso coins. Kahit mas marami yan. Right? So that's the law of conservation. Na kung kulang pa ang kanilang pag-intindi nito, no? Kung anong mas marami, yan ang mas malaki ang value. Hindi nila tinitingnan kung ito ay 50 pesos, 100 pesos, or what. No? And when it comes to 12 years to adulthood naman, dito nabibilang na yung formal operational stage, no? Wherein they can think abstractly, okay? They can give also hypothetical ideas. And mas malawak na ang pag-intindi nila when it comes to the world. So they can talk about ethics, politics, social, moral issues are explored. Right? So according to PJ, that's the highest already, the formal operational. Now, when it comes to moral perspectives naman by Lawrence Kohlberg, no? He developed his theory of moral development by assessing what morality meant. Okay? So in his search, he asked children to consider certain moral dilemmas, right? Or it's the situation in which right or wrong actions are not always clear. No? So Kohlberg did not focus on the answer of the children, but he studied their reasoning. Now, in his Heinz dilemma, so in Europe, a woman was near death from a special kind of cancer. There was one drug that doctors thought might save her. Right? It was a form of radium that a druggist in the same town had recently discovered. So the drug was expensive to make, but the druggist was charging 10 times what the drug cost him to make. No? So he paid $200 for the radium and charged $2,000 for a small dose of the drug. No? So the sick woman's husband, Heinz, went to everyone he knew to borrow the money, but could get together only $1,000. Now, he told the druggist that his wife was dying and asked him to sell it cheaper or let him pay later. But the druggist said, "No, I discovered the drug and I am going to make money from it." So desperate, Heinz broke the man's store and to steal the drug for his wife. Right. So when it comes to morality, ano kaya ang tama? Tama ba ang ginawa ni Heinz na pag-nakaw sa gamot para sa kanyang asawa? Right? Or tama ba ang ginawa ng isang ng tao na nag-discover nito? Right? So yan yung pinapabasa ni Heinz sa mga ano, no? And then they will look at kung ano ang tama at mali doon. Alright? Now, he gave us, okay, stages of moral development. Right? So, bakit ganun ang PowerPoint ko? But, nonetheless, let's continue. We have a pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. Bali, tatlo yan. And each convention may two stage para dito. Right? So, in pre-conventional morality, so, behavior is guided, okay, by rewards and punishments. Okay, yan yung natakpan kasi. Bakit kayang ganun? Right? Behavior is guided by rewards and punishments. So, behaviors are good or bad depending on their consequences. So, child does not understand the rules of society yet. Right? So, in stage 1, it is all about obedience or punishment orientation. So, children obey rules to avoid punishment. So, obeying rules is important to avoid punishment. Now, during self-interest orientation naman, there's an equal exchange. Okay, if one is good to others, then others will be good to you. Right? So, kung may binigyan kang maganda, alright? Or binigyan mo ng candy ang iyong kaibigan ng pagkabata, no? Maging kaibigan kayo, bibigyan ka din ng kunwari baon niya sa school. Alright? Now, in conventional morality, alright, the child begins to grasp social rules and gains a more objective perspective on right and wrong. Right? So in the third stage, it's more about social conformity already. So there is a sense of what good boys and nice girls do. So adolescents aim to get the social approval from those closest to them. So especially that this is already during adolescence. No? And sa mga adolescents, kailangan nila ng social conformity. Dito na yung may mga kaibigan sila na when it comes to groups, they have certain rules and regulations or norms. Okay? So, sumusunod sila sa kanilang mga kaibigan. Now, in law and order orientation, it focuses on how to follow rules of the society, okay? Respecting the authority and doing one's duty. All right? So, respect sa parents, sa instructor, sa teachers, or kung sa barangay, si barangay captain natin, mga barangay tanod, and of course, the police officers, or anyone who has the authority. No? Now, in post-conventional morality, at this level, emphasis is on the personal or idealized principle of a person. And in social contract orientation, right, it's the understanding, okay, is that laws, rules, and regulations are created for mutual benefit of all citizens. So people at this stage may sometimes disobey rules if they find them inconsistent with their personal values, and will also argue for certain laws to be changed if they are no longer working. So people understand and believe democracy in action. So ito yung yes, there's music naman. Right? So, in social contract orientation, yes, tama, ang law ay ginawa para sa lahat. Pero minsan, may mga tao na hindi pa rin sumusunod dito. Kasi parang um, conflicting yung mga ginawang law, okay, when it comes to their personal values. Okay? And the last stage is universal ethics orientation. So at this stage, people have a principled conscience and will to follow universal ethical principles regardless of what the official laws and rules are. So right and wrong are not determined by rules and laws, but by individual reflection of what is proper behavior. So, ano ba yung mga proper behavior na sinasabi natin dito? Ito yung kusang pagtulong sa ibang tao kahit kalaban mo yan. So, kahit sabihin ng iba na bakit mo tutulungan na kalaban yan. Right? And ano naman ito? It's about helping other people because you think it's the right thing to do. Right? Wait lang. Now, okay, so that's about moral development by Kohlberg. So, we'll go now to the modern perspectives, and we will be talking about William James, Edward Higgins, and Daniel Ogilvy. Now, in the idea of William James, in his book, Principles of Psychology, sabi niya, self as the sum total of all that a man can call his. So, anong ibig niyang sabihin dito? So, sabi niya, in studying the self, all constituents must be explored. So, lahat ng bagay. So, it doesn't only include his cognitive aspect, his emotional aspect, but lahat. Okay? Pati yung mga material things na meron ng isang tao and the like. Right? So, we will not only work on an individual aspect of an individual. No? Now, as we discussed before about the idea of the self, the I self and the me self. So basically, the I is the knower, okay, the experiencer, the present tense of yourself, or the storyteller. Okay, so ikaw yung nag-explore, no? And ikaw yung mismong nakakaranas, no? And the me self, is the self as known, okay, and it's the past tense. It's a story about yourself, okay, or ito yung social aspect ng iyong sarili na kilala ng ibang tao, no? Now, Edward Higgins naman, about his idea of self-discrepancy. Sabi niya, we have our ideal self and it's the person that we want to be. Okay? Yan ang discuss natin noon. And our out self, dinagdag niya ito, it's our understanding of what others want us to be. Okay? So, sino ba yung others na yan? Siyempre, yung ating mga parents or someone who is close to us, our society at large. No? And of course, the actual self. Okay? So, what happens when our actual self doesn't match with the ideal or our out self? Tingnan natin. So, ideal and out selves are guides and standards that we use to organize and motivate action. So, yung ideal mo, sabi mo, gusto kong maging accountant, gusto kong maging nurse, gusto kong maging doctor. No? So, yan yung ideal self mo. And yung out self mo, ano ba ang gusto ng ibang tao na gusto nilang maging para sa'yo? No? Gusto nila ikaw ay maging police, gusto maging abogado. Right? So, bakit sila nagiging guide and standards? So, we use these kinds of selves to serve as guides, okay, and standards. Now, what happens when there's discrepancy? No? So, tingnan natin to. When there's a discrepancy when it comes to our actual self and ideal self, no? What could be the negative consequences? Right? So, It would result to unhappiness, disappointment, dissatisfaction, and self-dislike. No? Yan ang nangyayari pag may discrepancy. So, bakit ka unhappy? Kasi nga hindi mo maabot yung ideal self mo. Kasi nga gusto mo maging abogado. Pero because of some problems, no? Hindi mo naabot ito. And you tend to become unhappy. You become disappointed sa sarili mo. And minsan you blame yourself. No? And what happens naman if there's a discrepancy between your actual self and your ought self? And there's fear, anxiety, personal inadequacy, and alienation. Bakit ka natatakot? Bakit ka nagiging anxious? Okay? It's because some people are expecting you to excel. No? And pag may discrepancy or hindi masyadong naabot yung gusto nila, natatakot ka. You become more anxious about yourself. Na bakit hindi ko naabot ito and the like. Right? So, ayun yung sinasabi ni Higgins dito. Now, what about the idea of Daniel Ogilvy? Right? So, sabi niya, he conducted study about the actual self, ideal self, and the undesired self. So, dinagdag niya naman dito ang idea of undesired self. The findings, sabi niya, discrepancies between the actual self and the undesired self were strongly associated with satisfaction, while discrepancies between the actual self and the ideal self were not strongly associated with satisfaction. Bakit kaya? Right? Yung undesired self mo nga, bakit pa mas mataas ang association when it comes to life satisfaction as compared to ideal self? No? According to the findings, no? The undesired self is more grounded in reality, while the ideal self is a very unclear concept because it is not rooted to any experiences. So, yun ang sinasabi niya, na hindi mo pa nararanasan yung ideal self mo. It's just a dream. No? And as compared to your undesired self, na you're currently experiencing it. Na naranasan mo na gusto mong baguhin ito. Gusto mo pang mapaganda. And pag naayos mo ito, mga undesired things about yourself, then you become more happy and more satisfied. So, yan yung sinasabi dito ni Ogilvy. Right? So, that's the end of psychological perspective. I'll be uploading this to our YouTube. No? And if you have questions, please ask me. Send me a private message if you have questions. Thank you and good day.